The dust-laden wind carried whispers across the Montana prairie as Leah Blackwood stood before Shadow Creek Ranch. At 13, the weight of being suddenly orphaned was only matched by the unexpected inheritance of this decaying homestead. The weathered sign creaked on rusted hinges, a hollow welcome to a place most locals avoided. They spoke of misfortune that clung to the land like morning mist, of disappeared ranch hands, livestock found bloodless at dawn, and the original family who vanished without explanation. Beyond the sagging porch, windows like vacant eyes stared back at her. Inside waited only cobwebs, broken furniture, and a cellar door secured with chains far too new for an abandoned property. What dark secrets could a forgotten ranch hold that someone still wanted protected? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The iron key trembled in Leah's hand as she pushed open the weathered door. This small, rusted object, the last gift from her father, had somehow unlocked the entrance to a place she never knew existed until the reading of her parents' will 1 week ago. The lawyer had handed her both the key and deed with obvious reluctance, his bushy eyebrows furrowing when she insisted on claiming her inheritance immediately. Dust motes swirled in the late afternoon light as Leah stepped into what had once been the main parlor. The floorboards groaned beneath her worn boots, protesting this first human intrusion in what must have been years. Cobwebs draped the corners like tattered lace curtains, and the air carried the musty perfume of abandonment. "You don't have to stay. Mr. Holloway," she called over her shoulder to the lawyer, who remained on the porch, handkerchief pressed to his nose. "I can manage from here. Miss Blackwood, I strongly advise against this." His voice carried the practiced patience of a man accustomed to being heeded. A young lady of 13 has no business living alone, especially in a place like Shadow Creek. The town is a half-day's ride away. There are arrangements that could be made with suitable families until you come of age. Leah's fingers tightened around the iron key until its teeth bit into her palm. My parents' letter was clear. This ranch is mine now. What she didn't add was that Shadow Creek represented her only alternative to the orphanage back in Denver. With no living relatives, at least none who had come forward after the accident, and funds too limited for proper schooling, this inheritance had appeared like an answer to desperate prayers. Holloway sighed, his breath stirring the dust. "At least allow me to send Jackson over. He's maintained minimal upkeep of the outbuildings these past years. Not much more than making sure the roof doesn't cave in, mind you, but he knows the property. Thank you. That would be helpful." She spoke without turning, her attention drawn to a faded daguerreotype on the mantel. Through years of dust, 3 stern faces stared back, men in dark suits with Blackwood features she recognized from her own mirror. Ancestors she'd never been told about. The lawyer's footsteps retreated across the porch. His horse's bridle jingled as he mounted. "I'll return in 3 days with supplies," he called. "Try not to disturb too much until then. This place has history." The hoofbeats faded down the overgrown drive, leaving Leah truly alone for perhaps the first time in her life. The vast silence of the ranch pressed in around her, broken only by the occasional creak of settling timber and the distant cry of a hawk riding thermals above the property. She moved through the house like a cautious explorer, trailing fingers along surfaces thick with dust, peering into rooms where furniture huddled beneath yellowed sheets like misshapen ghosts. The kitchen still held cast-iron pans hanging from hooks, a hand pump over a dry sink, a wood stove cold for years. A pantry revealed sealed jars with contents turned to unidentifiable murk. Upstairs, she found 3 bedrooms. The smallest, with a window facing east toward distant mountains, she claimed immediately, pulling sheets from a trunk that smelled of cedar and lavender sachet, long since lost its fragrance. As twilight approached, she lit a kerosene lamp found in a cupboard and carried it back to the parlor. From her small carpet bag, she removed her most precious possession, her father's pocket watch. The silver case was tarnished, the glass face slightly cracked from the same impact that had taken him and Mother both. Its hands stood frozen at 3:17, marking the moment the stagecoach had plunged from the mountain pass. "We're here now," she whispered to it, as though her parents might somehow hear through this object they had touched. "I don't understand why you never told me about this place, about family here, but I'll make it right again." The watch remained silent in her palm. But as darkness claimed the land outside, Leah could have sworn she heard footsteps moving in the room above, though she had explored every corner and confirmed she was alone. When she looked up at the ceiling, the footsteps ceased, only to resume with deliberate slowness after she had returned her attention to the watch. That first night, Leah slept with the kerosene lamp burning low, the pocket watch tucked beneath her pillow, and the iron key clutched tight in her fist. She dreamed of empty graves and a woman with her father's eyes standing at the foot of her bed, mouth moving in words she couldn't hear. Morning came with harsh clarity, stripping away night shadows that had made the ranch house seem full of lurking presences. Leah rose early, splashed her face with water from the canteen she'd brought, and changed into her second dress, faded blue calico that had once been her mother's, taken in at the waist and hemmed awkwardly by her own unpracticed needle. The pantry had yielded little beyond mouse droppings and spoiled preserves, which meant a journey into town was necessary. Mr. Holloway had mentioned Whispering Pines lay half a day's ride away, but Leah had no horse. She would walk before leaving. She tucked her father's watch safely beneath a loose floorboard she'd discovered in her bedroom. With the iron key in her pocket and a small leather pouch containing her meager savings, she set out along the rutted dirt road leading from Shadow Creek. The morning was cool, the vast Montana sky stretching endless blue above yellowed grasslands that rippled in the breeze. Leah tried to appreciate the wild beauty, but her thoughts kept returning to the strange sounds she'd heard in the night. Not just footsteps, but what had seemed like muffled sobbing coming from somewhere within the walls themselves. 4 hours of steady walking brought the first signs of Whispering Pines, wisps of chimney smoke visible in the distance, then the steeple of a small white church. By midday, Leah entered what passed for the town's main street, a dusty thoroughfare lined with false-fronted buildings, hitching posts, and wooden boardwalks. Eyes turned toward her immediately. Conversations paused. A woman crossing the street stopped mid-stride, her face registering something between shock and pity before she hurried on her way. Skirts raised slightly against the dust, Leah straightened her spine and continued walking, the weight of strangers' gazes pressing against her back. The general store was easy enough to spot, Abernathy's Mercantile painted in faded letters across its weathered facade. A bell jingled as she pushed open the door. Inside, shelves bowed beneath goods ranging from practical to fanciful. Sacks of flour and sugar, bolts of fabric, tools, penny candy in glass jars, patent medicines, and a glass case displaying combs and hairpins too fine for frontier living. Behind the counter stood a woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. Wire spectacles perched on a nose that had seen too much sun over the decades. "Good day," Leah began, approaching the counter. "I need some basic supplies." The woman's eyes narrowed, then widened with sudden recognition. "You're the Blackwood girl," she stated flatly. "They said you'd come to claim that place." Leah nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Leah Blackwood." A moment of silence stretched between them before the woman's expression softened imperceptibly. "Sarah Abernathy, known your great-uncle, God rest him." She reached beneath the counter and withdrew a bundle of yellowed newspaper clippings held together with twine. "Found these when I heard you'd be coming. Thought you might want them." Leah accepted the bundle, untying the twine with careful fingers. The clippings, fragile with age, contained various references to Shadow Creek Ranch, most over 50 years old. Headlines caught her eye. "Tragedy strikes at Shadow Creek Mine. 3 more ranch hands missing. Ezekiel Blackwood denies allegations." "What happened there?" Leah asked, looking up. Mrs. Abernathy's mouth tightened. "Not my place to say. Some stories are best left buried, especially when the bell above the door jingled, cutting her off. A broad-shouldered man in a sheriff's star entered, his beard shot through with grey, eyes hard as river stones. "This her?" he asked Mrs. Abernathy without acknowledging Leah directly. "Sheriff Caldwell," Mrs. Abernathy nodded. "This is Miss Blackwood, yes." The sheriff turned to Leah, his gaze unfriendly. "Heard you'd taken up at Shadow Creek. That property's not fit for habitation, especially for a child. Town council's prepared to make you a fair offer for the land. It's not for sale," Leah replied, tucking the newspaper clippings into her pocket. "You don't understand what you're getting into, girl. That place has history, bad history. Selling is the sensible thing. Is there a law against me living on my own property, Sheriff?" His jaw tightened. "No law, just common sense. That ranch has brought nothing but misfortune to everyone associated with it. You'd do well to take the money and find somewhere else to start over." A boy about Leah's age had entered behind the sheriff, carrying a box of supplies. He watched the exchange with open curiosity, his freckled face solemn beneath a mop of sandy hair. "I need flour, salt, coffee, and matches," Leah said to Mrs. Abernathy, deliberately turning away from the sheriff. "And whatever seed might grow this time of year." The sheriff made a disgusted sound and stalked out. As Mrs. Abernathy began gathering Leah's items, the boy stepped forward. "I'm Thomas," he offered. "My pa's the blacksmith. If you need help out at Shadow Creek, I could ride out sometimes." Before Leah could respond, Mrs. Abernathy interjected. "You'll do no such thing, Thomas Mason. Your father would skin you alive." To Leah, she added more gently, "Best keep to yourself, girl. That place, it doesn't welcome visitors." Leah returned to Shadow Creek as the afternoon sun began its western descent, casting long shadows across the overgrown property. The bundle of supplies from Mrs. Abernathy's store weighed heavy in her arms, but the newspaper clippings in her pocket seemed heavier still, fragments of a history deliberately obscured. The ranch house stood silent, awaiting her return. As she approached, movement caught her eye, a figure near the barn, tall and stooped. She froze, heart quickening, until the figure turned, revealing a weathered face beneath a battered hat. "You must be the Blackwood girl," he called, voice like gravel underfoot. "Lawyer said you'd come." Leah approached cautiously. "Are you Jackson?" He nodded once, leaning on a pitchfork. He'd been watching over things. "Not much to watch, truth be told, but a promise is a promise. You knew my great-uncle, and your grandfather before him." Jackson gestured toward the barn. "Got 2 horses still alive in there. Few chickens in the coop yonder. Not much else survived the neglect." Leah studied him. 70 at least, with hands gnarled like oak roots and eyes that had seen too much frontier hardship. "Mr. Holloway said you've kept the place from falling apart completely. Did what I could." He turned toward the north pasture, where tall grass swayed in the late-day breeze. "Best keep to the house and this side of the property. North pasture ain't safe after dark." "Why not?" Jackson's expression closed like a door shutting. "Just ain't." He stabbed the pitchfork into the ground. "I'll be in my cabin if you need anything. 1/4 mile east by the creek." With that, he trudged away, leaving Leah with more questions than answers. She carried her supplies inside and spent the remaining daylight cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing years of grime from the cast-iron stove, sweeping dust thick enough to plant in, and arranging her meager provisions on freshly wiped shelves. As she worked, her gaze kept returning to the newspaper clippings spread across the kitchen table, fragments of stories, some torn in ways that seemed deliberate rather than the result of age, references to mining operations she hadn't known existed on the property, mentions of disappearances, ranch hands who vanished without explanation. And always, hovering at the edges of these accounts, the name Ezekiel Blackwood, her great-grandfather according to the dates. Evening shadows lengthened across the floor when Leah finally took a lamp upstairs. The night before, she'd been too exhausted to properly explore, but now curiosity drove her to examine each room methodically. The master bedroom remained untouched, dust sheets still covering furniture. A smaller room had clearly been used as a study, but its door was locked tight, the keyhole different from the iron key she possessed. In the third bedroom, the one she'd claimed, Leah began clearing space for proper habitation. Beneath the narrow bed, her hand struck something solid. Pulling it out, she found herself holding a leather-bound book, its cover unmarked except for the impression of initials, J.B. inside. Pages yellowed with age revealed a meticulous hand, ranch records spanning decades, lists of cattle purchased and sold, weather patterns, employee names and wages paid. But as Leah turned pages, the entries began to change, becoming more personal, more troubled. October 17th, 1879, another hand gone missing. Sheriff claims he likely moved on without notice, but his belongings remain in the bunkhouse. That makes 3 this year. Something watches from the shadows of the north pasture. I feel its gaze when I ride the fence line. December 3rd, 1879. The scratching within the walls grows louder each night. Elizabeth claims it's merely mice, but mice don't scratch in patterns that almost resemble words. January 10th, 1880. I've boarded the entrance to the old mine shaft as Father instructed in his will. The men refused to go near it, speaking of cold winds and whispers from the darkness. Father knew what lurks beneath. I understand now why he insisted the property never leave Blackwood hands. The final entry, dated just 5 years ago, sent a chill down Leah's spine. I've done what I can to contain it. The protective measures should hold, but nothing lasts forever. If you're reading this, you are Blackwood blood. The responsibility passes to you now. Beware the north pasture after dark. Beware what sleeps beneath the earth. And most importantly, beware those in town who would have the ranch fall to ruin. They know not what they protect us all from. A noise from downstairs, the distinct sound of a floorboard creaking beneath weight, pulled. Leah from the journal. She held her breath, listening. Another creak, deliberate and slow. Someone was in the house. With trembling hands, she tucked the journal beneath her pillow and lifted the lamp, its light suddenly seeming feeble against the darkness gathering in the corners. "Hello?" she called, voice betraying her fear. "Jackson? Is that you?" No answer came, but the footsteps continued, moving with purpose through her home. Heart hammering against her ribs, Leah inched toward the bedroom door, lamp held high. The footsteps below had stopped at her call, leaving only suffocating silence. "I know someone's there," she said, forcing steel into her voice despite the tremor in her hand. "Show yourself." Nothing. Not even the natural settling sounds of an old house. Gathering her courage, Leah stepped into the hallway. The lamp's glow created a small island of light around her, beyond which shadows gathered thick as molasses. The stairs creaked beneath her weight as she descended, one careful step at a time. The parlor stood empty, dust undisturbed except for her own footprints from earlier. The kitchen, too, remained as she'd left it. Yet something felt different, a subtle rearrangement of the air itself, as though someone had passed through moments before. Her attention caught on the cellar door, previously closed, now standing ajar by inches. A cool draught whispered from the opening, carrying a musty mineral scent. Leah approached, holding the lamp toward the darkness below. The cellar stairs vanished into blackness her light couldn't penetrate. A soft thud from below made her jump back. Something had moved in the darkness. "Hello?" Leah whispered. The draught from the cellar strengthened, snuffing out her lamp in a single icy breath. Darkness swallowed her. She stumbled, clattering into the kitchen table as newspaper clippings fluttered to the floor. With shaking hands, she struck a match. Its feeble glow showed the cellar door slowly creaking shut, then locking itself with a seamless iron padlock that hadn't been there before. That night, Leah's dreams were filled with voices calling her name from beneath the floorboards. At dawn, weary but resolute, she discovered a loose baseboard hiding a brass key, untarnished despite its age. It fit none of the doors below, but upstairs it opened the locked study. Unlike the rest of the decayed house, the room was pristine, lined with shelves of old volumes and a desk covered in maps and letters. One map of Shadow Creek Ranch bore notations: north pasture, weakest point. Main shaft entrance, sealed 1879. Letters between her great-uncle Jonathan Blackwood and a professor hinted that the mine had broken into something not of natural origin. Jonathan's final note was chilling. Containment measures implemented. No further contact. Among the papers, Leah found an unfinished letter to her father warning that the barrier's thin. Blood calls to blood. The land will draw you back when needed. It ended mid-sentence, a creak behind her, nothing. But a corner of paper lifted, as if touched by unseen fingers. At the window, Leah glimpsed a woman in an old dress walking toward the north pasture, vanishing like mist. The brass key pulsed warm in her palm. Drawn by instinct, she ventured there. The air grew unnaturally cold, her breath fogging though it was spring. Among twisted cottonwoods, she found a small cemetery. Graves all dated 1878-79. Too narrow, too sunken, wrong. Her foot struck something buried, a bone totem carved with screaming faces, hollow eyes, twisted limbs. The moment she touched it, cold shot up her arm. The air thickened. Behind her, breathing, the woman from before appeared, translucent yet stern. "You shouldn't be here." "Not yet," Leah's voice shook. "Who are you?" "Elizabeth Blackwood." "Your great-grandmother," the ghost flickered. "You've come too soon. The preparations aren't complete." "What preparations?" "For what always comes next when a Blackwood returns." Her eyes fell to the totem. "It's the marker, not the graves that matter. What lies beneath them." The ground vibrated, something vast stirring far below. Elizabeth's form faded. "Go back. Read Jonathan's words. Prepare. They know you're here. They've felt your blood." Alone now, Leah tried to drop the totem, but her fingers wouldn't release it. It pulsed with her heartbeat. Twilight deepened. Shadows stretched long across the graves. From the cottonwoods came a chittering, insect-like whispering. Leah fled back to the ranch house, clutching the bone carving as movement stirred in the pasture behind her, things with no place in the rational world. Dawn found Leah still awake, huddled in the study, with her great-uncle's journals spread before her. The bone totem sat on the desk, finally relinquishing its grip on her sometime in the night. Sleep had come in fitful bursts, interrupted by sounds from within the walls, scratching noises that formed patterns too deliberate to be rodents. Her encounter with Elizabeth's ghost had left Leah shaken but resolute. The journals contained fragments that, pieced together, painted a disturbing picture of Shadow Creek's history. References to the incident at the mine in 1878, mentions of Ezekiel Blackwood's regrettable decisions and blood price, but nothing concrete, enough to explain what lurked beneath. The north pasture graves, the sun had fully crested the eastern hills when a knock at the front door startled her from her reading. Descending the stairs, bone totem tucked into her pocket, Leah found Jackson waiting on the porch, hat in hand. "Saw you in the north pasture yesterday," he said without preamble. "Told you to stay away from there. I needed to see it for myself." Leah met his gaze steadily. "I found the cemetery." Something flickered in Jackson's weathered face. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. "Then I reckon we need to talk." He glanced over his shoulder at the bright morning beyond the porch. "But not out here. Something shouldn't be spoken where the land might hear." Inside, Jackson refused to sit, instead pacing the parlor like a caged animal. His gnarled hands worked restlessly at the brim of his hat. "How much do you know?" he finally asked. "Not enough. I found my great-uncle's journals. They mention the mine disappearances in the late 1870s, and last night in the cemetery I saw—" Leah hesitated. "You saw Elizabeth." It wasn't a question. Jackson nodded as though confirming something to himself. "She appears to all Blackwoods who return. Part of the pattern." "What pattern?" Jackson's pacing stopped. From inside his vest, he withdrew a small leather wallet and from it a faded photograph. This was taken in 1877, just before everything went wrong. The sepia image showed a group of men standing before the ranch house, a younger, pristine version of the building Leah now occupied. In the center stood a severe-looking man with a patriarchal beard, flanked by younger men who shared the Blackwood features. To the side, almost at the edge of the frame, stood a much younger Jackson, barely 20, his face unlined by the decades of hardship that would follow. Most disturbing, however, were the strange light anomalies in the photograph, misty white shapes hovering near certain figures, particularly around the patriarch Leah assumed must be Ezekiel. "That's your great-grandfather," Jackson confirmed, pointing to the bearded man. "Ezekiel Blackwood. Visionary, some called him. Madman, others said. Truth somewhere in between, I expect." "What happened here, Jackson? What did he do?" The old man sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years and perhaps more. "Silver. That's how it started. Ezekiel discovered a vein on the property in 75. Good quality ore. He brought in miners, expanded operations. Money flowed. Then they dug too deep, broke into a cavern system that wasn't on any survey map." Jackson moved to the window, looking out toward the north pasture. "What they found down there, it wasn't natural. Structures that had no business being underground. Markings on the walls older than any civilization we know of. And something else. Something that had been sleeping until they disturbed it. What was it? Don't rightly know what to call it. Not ghosts, not exactly. More like hunger given form. Darkness that thinks. It took the first 3 miners before anyone realized something was wrong. Just absorbed them somehow." His voice dropped. "No bodies ever found?" Leah's hand closed around the bone totem in her pocket. "And Ezekiel? He didn't seal the mine like folks were demanding. Instead, he studied what was down there, became obsessed, started talking about power beyond imagining, energy that could be harnessed." Jackson's face hardened. Then the disappearances spread. Not just miners anymore, but ranch hands, travelers passing through, anyone who came too close to the north pasture after dark. "The cemetery," Leah whispered. "Those aren't graves, not really. More like anchors." Ezekiel discovered the entities could be temporarily bound to physical locations using certain rituals. "The names on the stones belong to the disappeared, but there's nothing of them left to bury." His voice cracked slightly. "I helped dig those holes, watched as Ezekiel performed his rituals. God help me, I was young and trusted him when he said it was for the greater good. But it didn't stop whatever was down there. No, just contained it. The entities can't leave the property, but their influence grows stronger with time. Your great-uncle Jonathan spent his life maintaining the barriers, strengthening them when they weakened. But with him gone," Jackson shook his head, "the town knows something's wrong out here. Not the whole truth, that died with most who witnessed it, but enough to stay away, enough to want this place to fall to ruin, hoping whatever's bound here might eventually starve and fade away. Why didn't my father know about any of this? Jonathan sent him away as a boy, wanted at least one Blackwood to escape the legacy. But the land has a way of calling its own back when needed." Jackson finally met her eyes directly. "That's why you're here, girl. Not by chance. The barriers are failing. Blackwood blood is needed to renew them." After Jackson left, Leah remained in the parlor, his revelations echoing in her mind. Blackwood blood is needed to renew them. The weight of inheritance had suddenly become far heavier than a decaying ranch house and overgrown pastures. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the floor, the sound of an approaching horse broke her reverie. Through the window, Leah spotted a familiar figure, Thomas, the blacksmith's son from town, dismounting from a pinto mare laden with burlap sacks. She opened the door before he could knock. "What are you doing here?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably, freckles standing out against his flushed face. "Brought some supplies. Ma said—" He caught himself. "Mrs. Abernathy said you might need more than you could carry yesterday." Leah glanced past him to where the town lay, invisible beyond rolling hills. "Your father knows you're here?" "Not exactly," Thomas offered a hesitant smile. "Told him I was fishing at Cripple Creek." Despite herself, Leah returned the smile. "Thank you. Would you like to come in?" Thomas helped carry the supplies inside. Tools for basic repairs, seeds for planting, preserves Mrs. Abernathy had sent along for a growing girl. As they worked, Leah found herself studying him. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable with physical labor, but his eyes held a thoughtfulness that belied his youth. "Mrs. Abernathy said your family's been in Whispering Pines for generations." Leah ventured. Setting jars on the pantry shelf. Thomas nodded. Since before it was properly a town. My great-grandfather was one of the first settlers. He worked the silver mines until... He stopped abruptly. Until what? Until they closed, he finished, but his eyes slid away from hers. That's all Pa would say whenever I asked. Leah's fingers found the bone totem in her pocket. Did he work at the Shadow Creek mine? Thomas's expression confirmed her suspicion before he spoke. How did you know about that? Most folks pretend that mine never existed. I've been finding things. Records, journals. She hesitated, then decided to risk partial truth. And Jackson told me some of the history today. Old Jackson actually spoke more than 2 words together. That's rare as hen's teeth. Thomas whistled low. Pa clams up tighter than a bull's backside whenever I ask about the old days. Says some history's best left buried. Would you help me with something? Leah asked suddenly. Thomas blinked at the change of subject. What kind of something? Leah led him upstairs to the study, where maps and journals remained spread across the desk. I'm trying to understand this place, my family's connection to it. Thomas approached the desk cautiously, eyes widening at the detailed property maps. This shows tunnels running all through the north section. I never knew the mine was so extensive. There's more. Leah hesitated, then decided to test his reaction. I found a cemetery in the north pasture yesterday. To his credit, Thomas didn't dismiss her or act surprised. Instead, his expression grew solemn. The missing workers. There are stories passed down quiet-like. Nothing folks talk about openly. What kind of stories? That the mine broke through to somewhere it shouldn't have. That people disappeared without trace. That... He stopped, embarrassed. That what? That the Blackwoods made some kind of deal with whatever was down there. Sacrificed their workers to it, he rushed on, but that's just superstitious nonsense. Mining accidents were common back then. Cave-ins, bad air. No need for ghost stories to explain it. As if summoned by his skepticism, a sudden cold draft swept through the study, rustling papers on the desk. The temperature plummeted, their breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. Thomas's eyes widened. What in tarnation? A heavy, silver-backed mirror that had hung unnoticed on the study wall crashed to the floor between them, its glass somehow remaining unbroken. In its reflection, Leah caught movement. Figures walking through the study that weren't present in the room itself. Among them, Elizabeth's stern face looked directly at Leah from within the silver-framed glass. "Good Lord," Thomas whispered, backing away. "Did you see that?" The fact that he'd seen it too confirmed this was no product of Leah's imagination. "Thomas, there are things happening here I don't fully understand yet. But I need to. My family is connected to whatever's wrong with this place, and I think I'm supposed to fix it somehow." Instead of fleeing as she half expected, Thomas squared his shoulders. "Then I'll help you. Pa may not talk about the past, but our family keeps records too. Old letters, ledgers from the store my great-grandfather ran. Might be something there that connects to all this." The mirror on the floor suddenly reflected candlelight, though no candles burned in the room. In its surface, Leah and Thomas saw the study as it had been decades ago, well-maintained, richly furnished, and occupied by a man writing frantically at the desk, his face haggard with exhaustion. Jonathan Blackwood, working by candlelight to maintain the barriers through ritual and sacrifice. "I'll come back tomorrow," Thomas said, his voice steadier than his pale face suggested. "Bring whatever I can find in our family records." As they descended the stairs, the bone totem in Leah's pocket grew cold again, while the mirror remained on the study floor, occasionally flickering with scenes from long ago, like a window into Shadow Creek's troubled past. After Thomas departed, promising to return the next day with his family's records, Leah continued exploring the house with renewed purpose. Each room yielded small discoveries: a hairpin behind a dresser, a forgotten pipe on a windowsill, fragments of lives abruptly abandoned. In the kitchen, she noticed something odd about the floorboards beneath the large oak table. Unlike the wide planks throughout the rest of the house, these were narrower, their color slightly mismatched. Pushing the heavy table aside, Leah knelt to examine them more closely. One board shifted under her weight, its edge rising slightly. Curious, she worked her fingers into the gap and pulled. The board came away easily, as if designed to be removed. Beneath it lay another, and another, all loose, all concealing a shallow space that shouldn't have existed between the kitchen floor and the packed earth foundation below. Heart quickening, Leah removed several boards to reveal a hidden compartment about 2 feet deep. Inside, protected from moisture and pests by a layer of oiled canvas, sat a dented tin box. She lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight. No lock secured it, only a simple latch worn smooth by repeated handling. When she opened it, the scent of old paper and ink rose to meet her. Dozens of documents, yellowed with age but meticulously preserved. The first was a letter dated 1876, written on Shadow Creek Mine Company letterhead. Mr. Blackwood, pursuant to our agreement, we hereby transfer ownership shares as discussed. The council members have each received their allotment in exchange for the considerations outlined in our previous correspondence. We trust this arrangement will remain confidential, as exposure would benefit neither party. With appreciation for your discretion, J. Caldwell, Whispering Pines Town Council. Leah's eyes widened at the signature. Caldwell, the same family name as the current sheriff who had been so hostile toward her. Digging deeper into the box, she found more letters, receipts, ledgers, and legal documents, all pointing to a disturbing conclusion. Ezekiel Blackwood had systematically bribed town officials with shares in the mine operation in exchange for their silence about the disappearances. Most damning were the payroll records. Men listed as missing or departed in the official mine records continued to receive payments for months afterward, though the signatures acknowledging receipt were clearly forgeries, all written in the same hand. These false records created the impression that workers had simply moved on to other opportunities. Concealing their true fates, folded document at the bottom of the box proved most revealing. A contract titled Agreement of Containment and Consideration, dated 1879, after the mine had officially closed. It outlined, in careful legal language that obscured its true horror, an arrangement whereby the founding families of Whispering Pines would maintain public silence about events at the mine in perpetuity. In exchange, Ezekiel Blackwood would ensure that whatever had been unleashed remained contained within Shadow Creek's boundaries, never threatening the town. Most disturbing was the addendum: should containment fail through neglect of Blackwood obligation, all property rights revert immediately to the town council, who shall implement alternative containment measure as discussed. The implications chilled Leah. The town's continued existence depended on whatever rituals and barriers her ancestors had maintained. If she failed to continue them, or worse, if she abandoned the property, the council had some alternative measure planned, likely one far more drastic than the current containment. As she processed this revelation, a sharp crack from beneath her startled Leah backwards. A floorboard had split completely, as if struck from below. Then another splintered and another. Something was breaking through from underneath the kitchen, scrambling away, tin box clutched to her chest. Leah watched in horror as the floor erupted. Splinters flew as boards were pushed upward and aside by forces unseen. The temperature plummeted, her breath clouding before her face as she backed toward the doorway. Where the floor had been, a gaping hole now yawned, darkness roiling within it like liquid shadow. From its depths rose the unmistakable scent of mineral-laden earth and something else, a sickly sweet odor reminiscent of decay, yet somehow older, more primal. A hand emerged from the darkness, skeletal fingers tipped with elongated nails, flesh desiccated and grey. It gripped the edge of the broken floor, pulling as if to heave something larger from the pit. The tin box in Leah's arms suddenly grew hot, documents inside rustling though no breeze stirred the kitchen air. The papers began to glow with faint blue light, illuminating text that hadn't been visible before, symbols interwoven with the standard legal language, forming patterns her eyes couldn't quite follow. The skeletal hand recoiled from this light. withdrawing into the darkness with a hiss like steam escaping a kettle. The hole in the floor remained, but whatever had been emerging retreated, leaving only the cold and the sweet, sick smell behind. Shaking, Leah backed from the kitchen, tin box still clutched protectively against her chest. Its contents had somehow repelled the entity, further evidence that her great-uncle had encoded protective measures into the very documentation of the family's dark bargain. The house creaked around her, as if settling after a disturbance. But Leah now understood these weren't the innocent sounds of an aging structure. They were the movements of something awakening within the walls themselves. Testing its boundaries, sensing the presence of Blackwood blood, returned to Shadow Creek at last. That night, Leah slept in the study, surrounded by her great-uncle's journals and the protective presence of the tin box whose contents had repelled the entity in the kitchen. She had dragged a mattress from one of the bedrooms. Unwilling to sleep anywhere, the floorboards might suddenly give way to whatever lurked beneath the house. Morning brought no relief from the tension that had settled into her shoulders. The hole in the kitchen floor remained, a black maw that seemed to swallow rather than reflect light. Leah avoided it, preparing a simple breakfast of hard biscuits and preserves at the far end of the kitchen table. Her meal was interrupted by a knock at the door. Thomas had returned as promised, his father's wagon loaded with tools and lumber. "Thought we might start some repairs," he explained, nodding toward the wagon. "Brought a friend, too." He gestured to a gangly young man with straw-colored hair who hovered uncertainly beside the wagon. "This is Samuel. His grandfather worked the mine before it closed. He wants to help." Samuel nodded nervously, eyes darting toward the house and away again, as if afraid to look directly at it. "My grandpa left journals," he said quietly. "I've read them. Know some of what happened here." Leah considered them both for a long moment before stepping aside. "You'd better come in then." She led them to the kitchen, pointing wordlessly at the hole in the floor. Samuel went pale. "It started already then. What has?" "The weakening. Grandpa's journal said it happens in cycles. Every generation the barrier's thin, unless they're renewed." He glanced at Thomas. "That's why we came. To help you understand what needs doing." Thomas set a cloth-wrapped bundle on the table. "We brought this too. Found it in my pa's storage trunk, hidden under the floorboards of our house." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a yellowed map of Shadow Creek, more detailed than any Leah had found so far. Across its surface, someone had marked dozens of locations with symbols in faded red ink, circles, crosses, and strange angular glyphs Leah didn't recognize. Samuel pointed to a large circle encompassing the north pasture. "Containment field," he explained. "And these," he indicated the crosses scattered throughout the property, "are anchor points where the original rituals were performed." "By Ezekiel," Leah said. Both boys nodded grimly. Thomas traced a finger along a dotted line running from the house to the north pasture. "This is the main tunnel, the one that connects to the cellar." "The cellar?" Leah remembered the padlocked cellar door, sealed with chains, that had appeared the night of her arrival. "It's connected to the mine?" "Not originally," Samuel said. "Your great-grandfather dug connecting tunnels after what they found. Made it easier to maintain the rituals without being seen from town." A new determination hardened in Leah's chest. "Show me." Together they descended to the cellar door, which remained chained shut with the impossible padlock. Samuel examined it, running his fingers over the seamless metal. "Bloodlock," he whispered, awe and fear mingling in his voice. "My grandfather wrote about these. Only opens for Blackwood blood." Leah stared at the lock, understanding dawning. "Stand back." When the boys had retreated several steps, she pressed her palm against the cold metal. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the lock grew warm beneath her touch. A sharp pain pricked her palm, and she gasped as a thin needle retracted back into the lock, taking a drop of her blood with it. The padlock clicked open. The chains, suddenly free, slithered to the floor with metallic whispers, moving like living things seeking escape. They coiled into the corner of the kitchen before going still. The cellar door swung open of its own accord, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. A cool draught carried the mineral smell Leah had detected before, along with the mustiness of confined space, long undisturbed. Thomas lit a lantern he'd brought from the wagon. "I'll go first," he offered, voice steadier than his pale face suggested. The stairs curved downward, deeper than seemed possible for a normal root cellar. The walls changed as they descended, transitioning from fitted stone to roughly hewn rock, clearly the work of miners rather than house builders. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a large chamber supported by heavy timber beams. Mining equipment lined the walls, picks, shovels, empty ore carts on rusted rails. But what drew their attention were the heavy iron chains bolted into the far wall. These were not like the chains that had sealed the cellar door. Thicker than a man's wrist, they hung in multiple strands, their links inscribed with the same strange symbols Leah had seen on the map and in her great-uncle's journals. Most disturbing, at the end of each chain hung a manacle sized for a human wrist or ankle. "Containment," Samuel whispered. "Not for ore or equipment. For the workers?" Leah asked, horror dawning. Thomas shook his head, examining the chains more closely. "These weren't for restraining people. Look at the symbols, protection wards. These chains weren't to keep something in, they were to keep something out," Leah finished. All three jumped as one of the chains swung slightly, though no draught stirred the stale air. The lantern light caught something etched into the wall behind the chains, a crude map showing the tunnel system extending from this chamber. One passage, marked with a heavy X, led directly toward the north pasture and the cemetery Leah had discovered. "That's where we need to go," Samuel said, pointing to the X, "where the original breach happened, where the barriers need renewing." Thomas insisted they return to town before exploring the tunnel marked with an X. "We need proper supplies," he argued. "Lanterns with more oil, rope, proper tools." Leah reluctantly agreed. The mysteries beneath Shadow Creek had waited decades. They could wait another day. In Whispering Pines, the trio separated, Thomas to gather mining equipment from his father's forge, Samuel to retrieve his grandfather's journals, and Leah to visit the town records office. If the founding families had conspired with Ezekiel Blackwood, the arrangement would have affected property boundaries and ownership. The records office occupied a corner of the town hall, a modest brick building that also housed the sheriff's office. Leah entered cautiously, relieved to find only an elderly clerk dozing at the desk instead of Sheriff Caldwell. "Excuse me," she called softly. The clerk startled awake, adjusting spectacles perched on his nose. "Yes, how can I help you, young lady?" "I'm researching the history of Shadow Creek Ranch," Leah said, deciding directness might serve better than subterfuge. "I'd like to see the original property records and any subsequent changes." Recognition dawned in the clerk's rheumy eyes. "You're the Blackwood girl." "I am." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Records are public. Cabinet 3, drawer 2 for Shadow Creek. Property maps in the flat files by the window." The clerk returned to his doze as Leah began her search. She quickly found what she sought, the original deed to Shadow Creek, showing boundaries far more extensive than the current property. Subsequent documents revealed how pieces had been carved away over the decades, transferred to various town founders at suspiciously low prices. Most interesting was a large tract of former Shadow Creek land that now constituted the wealthier section of Whispering Pines, where the sheriff and other prominent families resided. A marginal note on the transfer deed read simply, "Payment as per agreement of 1879. As Leah studied the maps, voices from the hallway caught her attention. Sheriff Caldwell and another man speaking in urgent, hushed tones. "Been out there 3 times this week," the unfamiliar voice was saying. "The old protections are failing faster than we anticipated. Jackson should have burned the place to the ground when the old man died," Caldwell growled. "Now with that girl there, Blackwood blood has returned. You know what that means." A heavy silence followed, broken by Caldwell's lowered voice. "The alternative measure, not yet. Council wants to wait, see if she figures it out herself. If the girl renews the barriers, we're saved the trouble and the risk. And if she doesn't, then we implement the plan. New moon's in 6 days. That's our deadline. Footsteps approached the records room. Leah quickly gathered the most revealing documents and slipped them into her pocket. Moving to a different cabinet just as the door opened, Sheriff Caldwell entered, followed by a thin man in an undertaker's black suit. Both stopped short at the sight of Leah. "Miss Blackwood," the sheriff said, suspicion hardening his features. "What brings you to town?" "Research," Leah answered truthfully, gesturing to the open drawer before her. "Learning about my family's property. The undertaker, Mr. Simmons, according to the gold lettering on his sleeve, studied her with calculating eyes." "Find anything of interest?" "Nothing unexpected," she lied. "Just trying to understand why portions of the original ranch were sold off over the years. Financial necessity, I expect," Simmons offered smoothly. "Your great-uncle wasn't much of a businessman." Sheriff Caldwell stepped closer. "Those papers in your pocket. Official records don't leave this office." "Court," Leah thought quickly. "These are copies I made. Notes for my research. Show me." Before Leah could respond, the door opened again and Mrs. Abernathy entered, her stern presence filling the small room. "There you are. Child," she said to Leah, "I've been looking everywhere. Your friends are waiting at my store with the supplies you needed." Her gaze shifted to the sheriff and undertaker, hardening imperceptibly. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Town council meeting's been moved up to 4 o'clock, in case you hadn't heard." The distraction worked. While the men exchanged glances, Mrs. Abernathy took Leah's arm and guided her firmly toward the door. "Come along now. Daylight's wasting." Outside, the older woman maintained her grip until they'd turned the corner toward the general store. "Careful who you cross, girl," she murmured. "Some in this town have much to lose if Shadow Creek's secrets come to light." "You know about the agreement," Leah stated rather than asked. Mrs. Abernathy's lips thinned. "My husband's father signed it. Most of us descendants know pieces, not the whole. But we've all benefited from the arrangement. Town built on stolen Blackwood land, prosperity bought with blood." "Why are you helping me then?" The older woman stopped, fixing Leah with a penetrating stare. "Because some debts can't be paid with property and silence. Because whatever's contained at Shadow Creek is growing stronger. We all feel it, even those who won't admit it. And because I'm old enough to remember your great-uncle Jonathan, good man, did his best with a terrible inheritance." In her apron pocket, Mrs. Abernathy withdrew a folded document, pressing it into Leah's hand. "Original deed to the entire Shadow Creek property before it was divided. Proves your claim to lands now occupied by half the town. Insurance if you need leverage against the council." Leah stared at the deed, yellowed with age, but officially stamped, its red wax seal still intact. "Why give me this?" "Because 6 days from now, at the new moon, the council plans to implement their alternative measure if you haven't renewed the barriers. And go," Mrs. Abernathy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Their solution involves burning Shadow Creek to ash, with you in it if necessary." Thomas and Samuel were waiting outside Abernathy's store with a wagon loaded with supplies, lanterns, rope, tools, and food for several days. Their expressions grew grave as Leah recounted the conversation she'd overheard and Mrs. Abernathy's warning. 6 days, Thomas murmured. "That's not much time." Samuel nodded, his face pale. "The new moon makes sense. Thinnest barrier between worlds, according to my grandfather's writings." As they left town, Leah noticed the weight of eyes watching from windows and doorways. The conspiracy of silence that had protected Whispering Pines for generations now felt tangible, a web of secrets with her ancestor at the center. Back at Shadow Creek, they gathered in the study to share their findings. Samuel spread his grandfather's journal open on the desk, pointing to a passage detailing the mining operation's final days. The cramped handwriting described how miners broke through into a cavern older than mankind's memory and disturbed sleepers from before time. "But this is what I really needed you to see," Samuel said, carefully unfolding a brittle piece of parchment tucked between the journal's pages. It was half of a hand-drawn map, The paper yellowed and edges charred as though someone had attempted to burn it. The portion that survived showed mining tunnels extending beneath Shadow Creek's north pasture, terminating at a large chamber marked with warning symbols and a notation in faded ink. Breach, sealed 1879, danger. My grandfather drew this, Samuel explained. He was part of the team that helped seal the initial breach after the disappearances started. He kept this hidden until his death. Leah studied the map fragment. It only shows half the tunnel system. Samuel nodded grimly. The other half was destroyed. Grandfather was afraid of what might happen if the complete map fell into the wrong hands. Said some knowledge was too dangerous to preserve intact. This matches what we saw in the cellar, Thomas observed, but shows more detail about the north section, where the original breach occurred. Leah compared the fragment to her great-uncle's maps. If we combine them, we might have a complete picture of what's beneath Shadow Creek. As the afternoon waned, they pieced together their knowledge. Samuel's grandfather had been one of the few miners who survived the initial breach, helping Ezekiel implement the first containment measures. The journals described rituals, using both indigenous knowledge and something older, symbols that spoke to the darkness in its own tongue. Most disturbing were the passages, detailing the anchoring process, how Ezekiel had used the disappeared workers as focal points for the barriers, their life energy somehow bound to the land through rituals that Samuel's grandfather had found unholy but necessary. The graves in the north pasture, Leah whispered. They're not memorials. They're binding sites, and they're failing, Samuel added. That's why the house is becoming more active, why the entity tried to break through your kitchen floor. The original bindings are weakening after all these years. Thomas spread out the combined maps on the floor, weighing the corners with books. According to this, the main chamber where the breach occurred is directly beneath the cemetery, and there's a tunnel leading to it from the cellar. That's where we need to go, Leah said. Samuel hesitated. My grandfather's journal mentions Professor Hammond, an expert on folklore and ancient religions who helped design the original containment. He collected all his research on Shadow Creek. If we could access his notes, where would they be? Thomas asked. The university in Helena. My grandfather mentioned Hammond donated his papers to their special collections before he died. Leah made a quick decision. Tomorrow, Thomas and I will take the morning stage to Helena. Samuel, can you stay here with Jackson? Make sure nothing changes while we're gone. Samuel nodded reluctantly. Be careful in the university. Hammond's research was controversial. They may not give you access easily. The following morning, Leah and Thomas boarded the stagecoach to Helena, carrying the combined map fragments and her great-uncle's most detailed journals. The 6-hour journey passed in tense silence, both aware of the deadline looming over them. At the university library, an initial inquiry about Professor Hammond's collection was met with resistance from the bespectacled librarian. Those materials are restricted, she informed them primly. Special permission required. Thomas stepped forward with the story they'd prepared. We're writing a scholarly paper on early Montana mining operations for school. Professor Campbell in Whispering Pines recommended Hammond's geological surveys. The librarian remained unmoved until Leah added, We're particularly interested in his work at Shadow Creek. Something flickered in the woman's eyes, recognition, perhaps fear. She studied Leah's face intently. You're a Blackwood, she stated rather than asked. Leah nodded, surprised. The librarian glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. Wait here! She disappeared into a back office, returning minutes later with a key. Hammond's complete collection is in the basement archive, Section E. This isn't in our catalog. Official policy is these materials don't exist. She pressed the key into Leah's hand. Return it before closing. And whatever you're looking for, be careful with what you find. In the basement, Section E proved to be a small, locked room containing dozens of journals, field notes, photographs, and artifacts. Hammond's life work, studying what he called thin places, where boundaries between worlds weakened. Amid this treasure trove of information, Leah found what they needed most: Hammond's detailed notes on Shadow Creek, including sketches of the original containment symbols and the rituals required to renew them. Leah and Thomas returned to Shadow Creek late the following day, their satchels heavy with hastily made copies of Hammond's most crucial notes. The professor's papers had revealed disturbing details about the entities beneath the ranch, beings he described as ancient, consciousnesses that existed between states of matter and energy, feeding on life force and memories. More importantly, Hammond had documented the containment ritual in exacting detail, the symbols needed, their precise arrangement, and the central role of Blackwood blood in binding the entities to the land. The ritual must be performed at the breach point, Leah explained to Samuel and Jackson as they gathered in the study. And it requires blood freely given by a Blackwood descendant. Jackson's weathered face creased with concern. Not just a few drops, girl. The binding's weakened too much. It'll take more than a pinprick this time. How much more? Thomas asked, voice tight with worry. Jackson exchanged a grim look with Samuel. Enough to risk her life. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken by approaching hoofbeats outside. Jackson moved to the window, his expression darkening. Trouble coming. Sheriff and about half the town with him. Leah joined him at the window. A group of riders approached the house, Sheriff Caldwell in the lead, followed by Mr. Simmons, the undertaker, and several other men Leah recognized from town. All carried rifles. Stay inside, Jackson ordered, reaching for his own shotgun propped beside the door. This was bound to happen. Before anyone could stop him, the old ranch hand stepped onto the porch, shotgun held casually but visibly. Sheriff Caldwell reined his horse to a stop at the foot of the porch steps. Evening, Jackson, the sheriff called. Time for you to step aside. This doesn't concern you. I made a promise to Jonathan Blackwood, Jackson replied evenly. Still keeping it. The girl's been poking into things best left buried, Caldwell said, loud enough for those inside to hear. Town council's decided it's time to implement the alternative measure. From inside, Leah watched the confrontation unfold, mind racing. The alternative measure mentioned in the overheard conversation, they weren't waiting for the new moon. Whatever they planned, they meant to do it now. Leah, Samuel whispered urgently, we need to show them we know how to fix this. That we have Hammond's research. She nodded and stepped onto the porch beside Jackson, Thomas, and Samuel, flanking her. Sheriff Caldwell, she called, whatever you're planning won't be necessary. We know how to renew the barriers. The sheriff's expression shifted subtly, surprise, perhaps relief, quickly masked by suspicion. You expect us to trust a child with the safety of our entire town? You trusted my great-uncle, Leah countered, and his father before him. This is Blackwood responsibility, just as it's always been. The barriers are failing faster than ever before, Simmons interjected. We can't risk— I need 3 days, Leah interrupted. The ritual must be performed at the right time, with proper preparation. Give me until the new moon, the sheriff dismounted, ascending the porch steps until he stood eye to eye with Leah. From his vest pocket, he withdrew a tarnished silver badge, much older than the one he currently wore. This belonged to my grandfather, he said, holding it between them. First sheriff of Whispering Pines, made from the first silver pulled from Shadow Creek mine. The badge caught the late afternoon light, its silver surface revealing strange markings etched around its edges, symbols matching those in Hammond's notes, designed to repel the entities. Our families have been bound together since the beginning, Caldwell continued, voice lower now. My grandfather helped yours contain what they unleashed. When the alternative measure was created, this badge was part of it, a key to unlock what Ezekiel buried beneath the North Pasture Cemetery. Understanding dawned in Leah's eyes. The alternative measure isn't about destroying Shadow Creek. It's about releasing what's contained here, directing it toward a new prison, Caldwell nodded grimly. A last resort. If the Blackwood barriers fail completely, we use this to redirect the entities. Sacrifice one to save many. Sacrifice who? Thomas demanded. The sheriff's eyes never left Leah's. Whoever performs the ritual becomes the new vessel. That's the price, whispers erupted among the men from town. One stepped forward. Thomas's father, the blacksmith. "Sheriff, you can't be suggesting we let a child—" "Not suggesting anything," Caldwell cut him off. "Just explaining the choices." To Leah, he added, 3 days, Miss Blackwood. Fix your family's mess, or we implement our solution." As the sheriff turned to leave, he pressed the silver badge into Leah's hand. "You might need this. Hammond designed it to amplify the Blackwood connection to the entities. Makes the binding stronger." The riders departed, leaving Leah standing on the porch, the sheriff's badge cold in her palm. Its weight felt disproportionate to its size, as though the silver itself carried the burden of its purpose. "What now?" Samuel asked quietly. Leah closed her fingers around the badge. "We prepare for the ritual. We have 3 days to figure out how to renew the barriers without anyone becoming a vessel." Inside, they spread Hammond's notes across the table. The professor had documented multiple approaches to the containment ritual, including one experimental version never implemented, a method requiring no human sacrifice, but instead a focus object of significant emotional resonance to both binder and bound. "An object connecting me to the entities," Leah murmured. "Something that bridges our worlds." Thomas's eyes widened in realization. "The bone totem you found in the cemetery. The marker." "Exactly," Leah agreed. "Now we just need to modify Hammond's ritual to use the totem and the badge together, creating a binding that doesn't require a living vessel." Jackson shook his head doubtfully. "Playing with powers you don't fully understand, girl. That's what got your great-grandfather into trouble in the first place." "I don't have much choice," Leah replied. "In 3 days, either I find a way to renew the barriers without sacrifice, or the sheriff implements his solution, which will likely get people killed." The sheriff's badge gleamed on the table before her, its silver surface catching the lamplight. The protective symbols etched around its edge, seeming almost to move when viewed from the corner of her eye. The next morning, Leah woke to the sound of breaking glass. Rushing downstairs, she found the parlor window shattered, a rock lying amid the glittering shards. Outside, the faint sound of galloping hooves faded into the distance. Thomas and Samuel, who had stayed the night in the bunkhouse, came running at her call. "Someone from town," Thomas guessed, examining the rock. "Warning us off!" "Or trying to scare us away," Samuel added, but Leah's attention had shifted to something else entirely, a change in the house itself. Overnight, the walls had developed a faint pulse, like a heartbeat felt rather than heard. The floorboards vibrated subtly beneath her feet. From upstairs came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, though no one was there. "It's accelerating," she said quietly. "Whatever's happening beneath Shadow Creek is getting worse." They spent the morning preparing for the ritual, gathering materials listed in Hammond's notes, silver filings, salt, herbs that Samuel identified from the professor's sketches. Jackson contributed bundles of sage and sweetgrass. "For cleansing," he explained gruffly. By afternoon, they were ready to explore the tunnel leading from the cellar to the breach point beneath the cemetery. Armed with lanterns, rope, and the combined maps, they descended into the darkness below the house. The tunnel beyond the cellar was narrow but surprisingly well constructed, its walls reinforced with timber supports placed at regular intervals. The air grew colder as they proceeded, their breath clouding before them despite the late spring warmth above ground. "The original miners followed a silver vein," Samuel explained, holding his lantern high to illuminate the glittering streaks in the rock walls. Hammond's notes suggest the silver itself has protective properties against the entities. That's why the mine was so valuable and so dangerous. Deeper they went, the tunnel gradually sloping downward. Leah led the way, Hammond's notes in one hand, lantern in the other. Behind her, Thomas carried the equipment they'd need for testing the modified ritual. Samuel followed with his grandfather's journal, consulting it whenever they reached a junction or doorway. An hour into their journey, they encountered the first sign of trouble. A support beam collapsed across their path, the tunnel beyond partially caved in. As they cleared debris, Thomas's lantern illuminated something half buried in the rubble, a dented metal helmet with a small lamp attachment still intact. "Miner's helmet," he said, carefully extracting it. Must have been here since the original collapse. The helmet was surprisingly well preserved, its leather straps still supple, the brass lamp housing tarnished but undamaged. Most remarkable, when Thomas experimentally turned the lamp's small valve, it ignited with a steady flame. "That's impossible," Samuel whispered. "No oil could last that long." Leah examined the helmet more closely, noting faint markings etched into the metal, symbols similar to those on the sheriff's badge and in Hammond's notes. "It's been preserved somehow. Protected." Thomas cleaned decades of grime from the helmet's surface. "There's a name inside, H. Mason." Mason. Leah looked at him sharply. "Like your family?" Thomas nodded slowly. "My great-grandfather worked the mine. I didn't know he swallowed hard. "I thought he left before the incidents." "That's what my father always said." "He might have," Samuel offered. "Not all the miners disappeared at once." But Thomas's expression suggested he'd realized a family truth long hidden. "I think my great-grandfather was involved in whatever happened here. Maybe he helped seal the breach." They carried Jackson to the bunkhouse, the only structure on the property that seemed untouched by the supernatural transformation affecting the main house. Once the old man was settled, Leah shared what she'd discovered. "Ezekiel's confession explains everything," she concluded. "The ritual, the graves, why the town council is involved. And it confirms what I suspected. There's a way to end this permanently, but it requires Blackwood blood and an object touched by both worlds." "The bone totem," Thomas suggested. Leah nodded. "And we have to perform the ritual tomorrow night at the dark of the moon. What's the great cost Ezekiel mentioned?" Samuel asked warily. Before Leah could answer, Jackson stirred on his makeshift bed. "Binding your life force to the seal," he mumbled, eyes still closed. Not death, not exactly. But not living either. Like Ezekiel, trapped between worlds. A heavy silence fell over the bunkhouse, broken only by the distant sounds of the main house, creaking, settling, transforming into something increasingly alien. "There has to be another way," Thomas insisted, face pale in the lantern light. "Hammond's research suggested alternatives," Leah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "If we combine his experimental approach with what we've learned from Ezekiel's confession, maybe we can seal the breach without anyone becoming trapped." Samuel looked unconvinced. "And if we can't?" Leah's hand closed around the sheriff's badge in her pocket. "Then I'll do what needs to be done. This is Blackwood responsibility, my responsibility." Outside, darkness had fallen completely. Through the bunkhouse window, they could see Shadow Creek Ranch House silhouetted against the night sky, its outline somehow wrong. Angles too sharp, dimensions subtly altered. Lights moved behind windows where no lights should be, and shadows shifted along the porch that had nothing to do with the wind. "One day," Leah whispered, "watching the house that had become both inheritance and prison. One day to find a solution that doesn't end with more sacrifice." Dawn brought no comfort to Shadow Creek. The ranch house stood in the early morning light, its appearance subtly wrong. Windows slightly misaligned, porch steps too numerous, chimneys twisted like arthritic fingers reaching skyward. Occasional tremors ran through the ground beneath their feet, as though something massive shifted in its sleep far below. "We need to retrieve the ritual implements," Leah said, watching the house from the bunkhouse window. "Hammond's notes mention specific tools stored in my great-uncle's study." "You can't go back in there," Thomas protested. "You saw what happened to that book." "We don't have a choice." Leah's voice was steady despite her fear. "Without those tools, we can't perform either version of the ritual, Hammond's experimental one or Ezekiel's permanent solution." Jackson, stronger after a night's rest but still weak, pushed himself to a sitting position on his cot. "I've seen Jonathan use them. Silver bowl with markings around the rim, ceremonial knife with a bone handle, small wooden box containing candles made with special wax. I know where they are," Leah said. "Hidden compartment in the study floor. I found it while exploring, but didn't understand its significance then." In the end, they decided Thomas would accompany Leah to retrieve the items while Samuel stayed with Jackson. Armed with Hammond's protective symbols hastily copied onto scraps of paper, they approached the house cautiously. The front door swung open at their approach, not an invitation, but a challenge. Inside, the transformation had progressed further overnight. The entry hall stretched impossibly long, the ceiling too high, walls curving inward at subtle angles that strained the eye. The air felt thick, resistant, as though they walked through invisible cobwebs. "Stay close," Leah whispered, leading the way toward the stairs. Halfway up, a floorboard cracked beneath Thomas's foot. The entire staircase shuddered, steps rippling like disturbed water. From deep within the house came a low, resonant hum that vibrated in their bones. "It knows we're here," Thomas said unnecessarily. The study door stood ajar, darkness seeping around its edges, despite the morning sunlight that should have filled the room. Leah pushed it open fully, revealing a space transformed. Bookshelves now curved organically, books fused to the wood-like growths. The desk had partially melded with the floor, its surface rippling occasionally like the skin of some giant creature. Most disturbing, Ezekiel's confession book now floated above the desk, suspended in mid-air, pages fluttering wildly, though no breeze stirred the heavy air. "The compartment's beneath the window seat," Leah said, pointing to the far wall. They edged around the room's perimeter, avoiding the center where reality seemed most distorted. The window seat appeared unchanged, its wooden lid still solid. When Leah cautiously touched it, she lifted it carefully, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside lay a collection of objects, wrapped in faded velvet, exactly what Jackson had described. The silver bowl gleamed, despite decades of storage, strange symbols etched around its rim catching the light. Beside it, a ceremonial knife with a yellowed bone handle, its blade sharp and untarnished. A small wooden box, intricately carved with protective sigils, contained 7 black candles made from a waxy substance that wasn't quite beeswax or tallow. "These are it," Leah confirmed, gathering the items carefully. As she lifted the ritual implements from their resting place, the floating book across the room began to emit a high-pitched keening sound. The pages flipped faster, and the dark substance Leah had seen yesterday began to ooze more rapidly from between them, forming a puddle of shadow on the writhing desk surface. "Time to go," Thomas urged, taking the wooden box from her hands. They had nearly reached the door when the shadow puddle rose upward, stretching and forming into a vaguely humanoid shape. It lacked distinct features except for deep indentations where eyes might be, and a gash approximating a mouth. "Blackwood, child," it spoke, voice like stone grinding against stone. "Ezekiel's blood. We have waited." Leah froze, clutching the silver bowl against her chest. "What are you?" "We are the forgotten, the buried, the waiting ones." The shadow figure rippled, its form unstable. "Your ancestor found us, used us, bound us. Release us." "I can't do that," Leah said, voice steadier than her pounding heart. "You don't belong in our world." The shadow laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We were here before your kind crawled from the ocean mud." "This world was ours first, Leah," Thomas whispered urgently. "The protective symbols." She fumbled in her pocket for the paper scraps inscribed with Hammond's symbols. As her fingers closed around them, the shadow figure lunged forward with impossible speed. Thomas thrust himself between Leah and the entity, holding up the wooden box of ritual candles. The shadow recoiled from the protective sigils carved into the wood, its form rippling with rage. "Run!" Thomas shouted, pushing Leah toward the door. They fled through the twisting corridors of the house, the silver bowl and knife clutched in Leah's hands, the wooden box in Thomas's. Behind them, the shadow pursued, sometimes flowing along the floor, sometimes oozing through walls and ceiling. The house itself seemed to aid the entity, floorboards buckling to trip them, doorways narrowing as they approached. They burst through the front door into sunlight, which momentarily halted their pursuer. The shadow figure hovered in the doorway, unable or unwilling to venture into direct daylight. "You cannot stop what comes," it hissed, voice fading as they backed away. "The barrier's thin. The way opens. We rise, Safe in the bunkhouse once more, they spread the ritual implements on Jackson's small table. The old ranch hand examined each piece carefully, confirming they were indeed what Jonathan had used to maintain the barriers over the years. These were Ezekiel's originally, he explained, turning the silver bowl to catch the light. Some say he brought them with him when he came west, that they're much older than they appear. Samuel studied the symbols etched around the rim. These match the markings in the containment chamber and on the sheriff's badge. Protective sigils meant to channel and direct energy. Can we adapt Hammond's experimental ritual to use these? Leah asked. Samuel nodded slowly. I think so. The professor's notes suggested using symbolic substitutes for physical sacrifice, the bone totem, in place of a living vessel, representing the connection between worlds, and the sheriff's badge, Thomas added. Silver from the mine, already imbued with protective properties. Jackson looked unconvinced. Hammond never tested his theories. No guarantee they'll work. It's our best chance, Leah insisted. Otherwise, either I become trapped like Ezekiel, or the sheriff implements the alternative measure, which could release the entities entirely. As the day progressed, they prepared for the ritual, consulting Hammond's notes and modifying them based on what they'd learned from Ezekiel's confession. The bone totem would serve as the focus object placed within the silver bowl. The sheriff's badge, representing authority and protection, would amplify the binding. The candles, positioned at specific points mirroring the arrangement of graves in the north pasture, would establish the ritual boundary. By late afternoon, a plan had taken shape. They would enter the tunnels at nightfall, reaching the breach chamber as the moon disappeared completely from the sky. Leah would perform the modified ritual, using her blood to activate the binding without becoming permanently trapped herself. It might work, Samuel said, though his tone carried little conviction. It has to, Leah replied simply. Twilight descended over Shadow Creek, the fading light revealing how far the transformation had progressed. The ranch house now resembled something from a nightmare. Walls bulging outward in organic swells, windows pulsing like membranous eyes, the entire structure seeming to breathe in slow, laborious rhythm. The ground surrounding it had darkened to an unnatural black, cracked in patterns that resembled the symbols in Hammond's notes. In the bunkhouse, final preparations were underway. Samuel carefully transcribed the modified ritual onto a piece of paper for Leah to follow. Thomas packed supplies they would need in the tunnels, extra lantern oil, rope, matches. Jackson, still too weak to accompany them, offered last-minute advice based on his decades witnessing Jonathan's maintenance rituals. The entities will fight you, he warned. They'll try anything to prevent the sealing, illusions, promises, threats. Trust nothing you see or hear once you're in the chamber. As Leah gathered the ritual implements into a leather satchel, she felt the weight of what lay ahead. Despite their modifications to Hammond's experimental approach, success remained uncertain. If they failed, the consequences would extend far beyond Shadow Creek. Just before they were ready to depart, Thomas approached with something clutched in his hand, a silver pendant on a tarnished chain. Found this among my great-grandfather's things, he explained, holding it out to her. My father kept it locked away, never let anyone touch it. Said it was dangerous. The pendant was beautiful in its simplicity, a small silver disc engraved with the Blackwood family crest on one side and intricate protective symbols on the other. At its center, set beneath crystal as clear as spring water, was what appeared to be a lock of dark hair. It's a binding amulet, Samuel said, examining it carefully. Hammond's notes mentioned these. They contain physical connections to everyone involved in the original binding ritual. Leah turned the pendant over in her palm, feeling unexpected warmth radiating from the metal. Whose hair is this? Not just one person. Samuel pointed to barely visible divisions in the small coil. Strands from multiple individuals, braided together. Probably Ezekiel, Jonathan, and maybe others with Blackwood blood. My great-grandfather must have been given this for safekeeping, Thomas said. Another connection between our families, Leah unclasped the chain and placed it around her neck. The moment the pendant touched her skin, a jolt of energy passed through her body. Not painful, but intensely present. As though dormant magic had suddenly awakened. It recognizes you, Jackson said softly. Blackwood blood calls to Blackwood blood. With the pendant against her heart, ritual implements in her satchel, and determination steeling her nerves, Leah led their small group toward the house. Night had fallen completely now, the new moon leaving the sky utterly black save for distant stars. They entered through the kitchen, avoiding the hole still gaping in the floor. The house seemed almost to recoil at their presence, walls contracting like muscle tissue, floorboards rippling beneath their feet. The air felt thick, resistant to their passage. Carrying whispers just below the threshold of hearing, the cellar door hung open, darkness beyond it absolute despite Thomas's helmet lamp and their additional lanterns. As they descended the stone steps, the temperature dropped precipitously. By the time they reached the cellar floor, their breath clouded before their faces in dense white plumes. "The tunnels will be worse," Samuel warned, consulting Hammond's notes one final time. "The closer we get to the breach point, the more the entities can affect our perceptions." Leah nodded, touching the pendant beneath her shirt for reassurance. "Stay together. Trust nothing but each other." The journey through the tunnels seemed to stretch impossibly, passages bending and twisting in ways their maps couldn't account for. Several times they reached dead ends that shouldn't have existed, forcing them to backtrack and choose different routes. The walls themselves appeared to shift when not directly observed, stone surfaces occasionally revealing momentary impressions of faces in silent screams. Throughout their descent, the pendant against Leah's skin grew increasingly warm, sometimes pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, other times establishing its own counter-cadence. Whenever they faced a choice of direction, she found herself instinctively turning the way that made the pendant's warmth intensify. "It's guiding us," she realized aloud, "showing us the true path when the entities try to mislead us." After what seemed like hours, they finally emerged into the vast chamber containing the breach. The transformation evident above ground had progressed even further here. The stone floor had developed a texture reminiscent of skin, the support columns now twisted like enormous spinal vertebrae, the ceiling lost in darkness that their lights couldn't penetrate. Most disturbingly, the pit at the chamber's center had widened significantly. The 7 marker stones around its perimeter remained in place, but the silver lines connecting them had tarnished to black. From the pit itself rose tendrils of darkness, not smoke but something more substantial, coiling like curious fingers testing the air. "We need to hurry," Samuel whispered, voice tight with fear. The barriers almost completely collapsed. They worked quickly, setting up the ritual as planned. Thomas placed the candles at precise intervals around the pit, while Samuel prepared the silver bowl, positioning it at what Hammond's notes called the focal point, where energy converged. Leah removed the bone totem and sheriff's badge from her satchel, setting them carefully beside the bowl. Finally, she withdrew the pendant from beneath her shirt, its glow now visible even in the dim light of their lanterns. "It's time," she said, voice steadier than her racing heart. Samuel checked his pocket watch. Midnight. The dark of the moon is at its peak. The ritual began with Leah reciting the incantation from Hammond's notes, modified to include elements from Ezekiel's confession. The words felt strange on her tongue, ancient syllables that resonated with the chamber itself, causing ripples across the skin-like floor. As she spoke, Thomas lit the 7 black candles. Each flame burned with unusual intensity, colors shifting from normal orange to deep blue to vibrant purple. The pendant around Leah's neck grew hot enough to be uncomfortable, its glow intensifying until it cast her features in sharp relief. When the final words of the incantation faded, Leah took up the ceremonial knife. This was the moment they had debated most, how much Blackwood blood the ritual required. Hammond's notes suggested intent matters more than quantity, but Ezekiel's confession implied a more substantial sacrifice. Taking a deep breath, Leah drew the blade across her palm. Blood welled immediately, bright crimson in the candlelight. She held her hand over the silver bowl, letting 7 drops fall, 1 for each marker stone, 1 for each lost soul used in the original binding. With Blackwood blood freely given, she recited, I renew the seal between worlds. She placed the bone totem and sheriff's badge into the bowl alongside her blood, then finally removed the pendant and added it to the ritual components. The moment all 4 elements came together, the chamber plunged into absolute darkness, as every lantern and candle extinguished simultaneously. Total darkness enveloped them for what seemed an eternity. Then gradually, a faint luminescence emanated from the ritual components in the silver bowl. The combined elements, Leah's blood, the bone totem, the sheriff's badge, and the family pendant, had begun to merge, their boundaries dissolving as they formed something new. It's working, Samuel whispered, his face ghostly in the otherworldly light. But before Leah could respond, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. The darkness from the pit surged upward, no longer tentative tendrils, but a massive column of writhing shadow that reached toward the chamber's unseen ceiling. Within this column, faces formed and dissolved, contorted in agony, eyes pleading, mouths open in silent screams. The entities, Thomas gasped. They're fighting back. A voice emerged from the darkness, not one voice, but many, speaking in unison, the sound vibrating through their bones rather than reaching their ears. Blackwood, child, you cannot undo what has been done. Leah stood firm, though fear threatened to overwhelm her. I'm not trying to undo it. I'm completing it, properly this time. The column of darkness contracted, then expanded outward, filling the chamber with freezing cold and the smell of ancient earth. From within it, a figure began to coalesce, tall, bearded, dressed in clothes from another era. As the features solidified, Leah recognized the man from the photographs. Ezekiel, she breathed. The apparition of her great-grandfather regarded her with eyes that contained too much darkness to be human. You think you understand, but you don't. The binding was never meant to be permanent. It was preparation. Preparation for what? Leah demanded, her hand instinctively moving to protect the glowing ritual components. Ascension. Ezekiel's form flickered between solid and transparent. They offered me knowledge beyond mortal comprehension. Power to reshape reality, immortality of a kind. In exchange for helping them return, you sacrificed innocent people, Thomas accused, stepping forward. Ezekiel's gaze shifted to him, then to the miner's helmet he wore. Mason's boy, your ancestor understood better than most. He helped design the binding markers. His attention returned to Leah. The ritual you attempt will fail. The sacrifice is insufficient. Blood freely given must be blood fully spent. There's another way, Leah insisted. Hammond found it, a binding through connection rather than sacrifice. The apparition laughed, a sound like stone grinding against stone. Hammond was a fool. He'd never understood what lies beneath, what has always lain beneath. Ezekiel extended a hand toward her, palm up. Join me, child of my blood. Accept the inheritance in full. Let them teach you what they've taught me. For a heartbeat, Leah felt a pull toward her ancestor, a seductive whisper of power and knowledge beyond imagining. But the pendant's warmth against her skin anchored her to reality. No, she said firmly. This ends now. She turned back to the ritual components, which had continued their transformation during the confrontation. The separate elements had fused into a single object, a disk of silver and bone, engraved with symbols that combined the protective sigils from the badge, the connecting patterns of the totem, and something new that seemed to right itself before their eyes. Ezekiel's apparition lunged forward with impossible speed, but stopped short at the edge of the candle circle, repelled by some invisible barrier. You cannot complete this. The consequences of not completing it are worse, Leah cut him off. She lifted the transformed disc, now pulsing with light in rhythm with her heartbeat. This belongs at the center. Before Ezekiel could respond, Leah stepped forward and dropped the disc into the pit. For a moment, Nothing happened. Then a blinding column of light erupted from the darkness, shooting upward through the ceiling and presumably continuing all the way to the surface. Ezekiel's form began to disintegrate. Particles of shadow pulled inexorably toward the light. "What have you done?" he cried, voice fading. "They'll take me with them." "No," Leah said softly. "They're taking what belongs to them, the energy, the consciousness they lent you. But your soul is your own, great-grandfather. It always was." As the light intensified, the 7 marker stones around the pit's edge began to glow in sequence. With each activation, a translucent figure appeared briefly, the missing miners and ranch hands, their expressions shifting from pain to peace before they dissolved into particles of light that joined the central column. The chamber itself was changing, stone surfaces smoothing, unnatural growths receding. The skin-like floor hardened back to natural rock, support columns straightening from their twisted forms. "It's working," Samuel exclaimed. "The barriers aren't just being renewed, they're being transformed." Thomas pointed upward. "Look! The light, it's creating something new." Above the pit, where the column of light met the chamber ceiling, a pattern was forming. A vast, intricate symbol, unlike anything in Hammond's notes or Ezekiel's confession. It combined elements of both but transcended them, creating what Samuel called a permanent seal, anchored in willing sacrifice rather than forced bondage. As Ezekiel's form disappeared completely, the light began to fade. In the final moments before darkness would have reclaimed the chamber, their lanterns and the ritual candles reignited simultaneously, revealing the transformed space. The pit remained. But now a solid crystal disk sealed its opening, the merged ritual components visible at its center like an insect preserved in amber. The silver lines connecting the marker stones had returned, glowing with renewed purpose. Leah approached the crystal seal cautiously. Within it, she could see the fused remains of the sheriff's badge, bone totem and family pendant, eternally preserved in the moment of transformation. Most remarkably, what had been drops of her blood had transformed into a small tree-like structure, roots extending downward into the darkness, branches reaching upward toward the light. "A perfect balance," Samuel breathed, consulting Hammond's notes with shaking hands. His theoretical perfect seal, life freely given, creating a self-sustaining barrier. The entities remained contained, but no longer through suffering. The ground beneath them shuddered one final time, not the violent tremor of before, but something gentler, like a body settling into restful sleep. Throughout the chamber, dust began to fall as the tunnel system started a gradual, natural collapse. "Time to go," Thomas urged. Gathering their remaining supplies, they made their way back through tunnels that no longer shifted deceptively, though fallen rocks and creaking support beams warned of imminent cave-ins. By the time they emerged into the cellar, sections of the tunnel behind them had already collapsed, sealing the way permanently. Above ground, dawn was breaking over a transformed Shadow Creek. The ranch house had returned to normal, weathered and neglected still, but once again just a house, not the nightmarish fusion of architecture and organism it had become. In the north pasture, the old graves remained, but the twisted cottonwoods stood straighter, their branches lifting toward the morning sun.